essays, even an opera, and she has won a lot of awards, including Jose Ruben Romero National Book Award and the Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz Prize, and a MacArthur Genius Award. Starting with No One Will See Me Cry in 2003, her books began to appear in English translation. I didn't really catch up on her authorship until the Iliac Crest, which was published in 2017. And then I started really paying attention. This is a tale where the narrator is confronted by two women, including one who claims to be the legendary Mexican Gothic author Amparo Davila. Spoiler, she isn't. And among and who tells the narrator, among other things, that he is actually a tree and possibly a woman. This book was followed by the brilliant Gothic crime novella, The Taiga Syndrome, which was published in 2018 in the US. This novella features a narrator who claims not just to be a detective, but a failed detective. This detective cannot make a neat, narrow, linear story out of her cases. She's too open-ended, too lost in the ambience, not focused enough on making reductive conclusions. The narrator travels to a foreign land where she comes to depend on a translator as she tries to reconstruct the life of a woman who has run away with her lover. As you may already be able to tell from these short synapses, one of the key acts in Cristina's work is the act of reading. Reading is an act of the highest magnitude in these books. It's exciting, intimate, powerful, and volatile. Detective is failed detective in part because she's a good reader. She's a great reader. She's overwhelmed, affected, yet attuned to the strange details and characters that she meets. This sense of the narrator as reader becomes even more important in Garza's most recent book, Liliana's Invincible Summer, which she's going to be reading from tonight. Like The Taiga Syndrome, this is a kind of crime book, but it's not a fiction book. It's a non-fiction book in which Garza travels back to Mexico and 30 years back in time to investigate the murder of her sister Liliana, who at the time was an architecture student in Mexico City. Unlike so many true crime books, Garza is not coy about who the killer is, but this is not the point of the book. More important to the book is the act of reading her sister's diaries, notes, and the notes of friends, and the letters to friends and from friends, and songs that they listen to. Unlike almost any true crime book I can think of, Garza's book lets Liliana, the victim, speak for herself as she quotes her diary entries and so on. When a friend is sad about a breakup, Liliana gives her a note with a quote from Albert Camus. And it is, "In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer." In this way, it feels to me like a defiant book, as well as a book of grieving and mourning. And rarely have I seen grief be documented with such intensity. So I really look forward to hearing Garza read from this book tonight. Please welcome her to Notre Dame.
Buenas noches. Hola, ¿cómo están? Good. I'm doing just fine. Very happy to be here, indeed. Well, thank you so much to Notre Dame University, the Creative Writing Section Department, program, the English Department. I'm really happy to be here. And thank you, Johannes, for that introduction. Very generous of you. I'm going to be reading from my most recent book, Liliana's Invincible Summer. And yes, indeed, this is an excavation, an exploration of the femicide of Cristina Rivera Garza, my younger sister. She was murdered on July 16, 1990, when she was an architecture student in Mexico City, in the UAM Azcapotzalco, in a very working class neighborhood in the city. back then, in 1990, the only narrative available to talk about this crime was the patriarchal passion crime narrative, one that implicitly blames the victim and exonerates the perpetrator. So it was absolutely difficult to talk about Liliana and to even enunciate to utter her name, I'm sorry. So there were many years of forced silencing around Liliana's demise, and more or less 30 years, which it took me personally, at a personal level, 30 years to navigate my own grieving work, but also I think socially it took us 30 years to develop a language precise enough, compassionate enough to recount stories of gender violence in a different way, in a way that veers from these patriarchal narratives, a way that honors the victim's perspective, their friends, and their families. So that's one of the things that was very important for me when I was writing this book. A second issue that you might want to know about before I begin my reading is that when violence is involved in the death of someone you love, there is a pressure almost to focus mostly on the death as such, on the violent act as such, very often forgetting the richness, the complexity of the life behind it. And in this book, I wanted, of course, to explore all the complexity, all the forces at play in Liliana's femicide. But I didn't want to forget, I didn't want you, readers, to forget that Liliana's life was luminous, was rich, was complex. And I wanted readers to have a sense of that lively energy that distinguished Liliana when she was here with us on Earth. And I was going to tell you some other things, but I think perhaps that will be better for the Q&A. I think this is enough for the context. And let me start with Liliana's voice. As Johanna said, this book would not have been possible without the documents, Liliana's own archive. Liliana wrote a lot. She wrote voraciously, and she wrote way more than I was reading back then in the 1990s. As I am proud to tell, back then, Liliana was writing tons of letters, her diary, reading and underlining, and I was enrolled in sociology. I was majoring in sociology at the UNAM, so I was very busy changing the world. I didn't have time to write, so she was doing the writing. She was back then the true writer of the family. This is one of her letters. This is the last page of my notebook. Well, the first one from back to front. You know what I mean, depending on how you look at it, because it is a matter of thinking young. It is a matter of thinking positively, a matter of focus. Don't you like the ad? Oh well, I do. So what? Well, nothing. I'm in such a completely lazy mood, and I'm very sleepy too. And when you suffer from those two conditions, but nevertheless, you also have an aversion to sleep during awake hours, there is this very big shock. And do you know what happens? Well, in addition to sleepiness and laziness, a very funny foolishness crops up. That is happening to me right now. So much so that you even feel like sitting down or laying down or kneeling just about anywhere. And then it just so happens that you inevitably start thinking, and you turn to look at the clock on the wall, and you think that your mother is going to arrive soon, and that you have to pay your school tuition bill, and that today you did not see Angel, and you don't feel like training. You also think that you no longer want to train because when you're not in a quiet environment, it is impossible for you to develop your concentration and full physical potential. And you think that your exams are almost here, and above all, you worry when your worry is not big enough for you to get up, grab your notebook, and study, right? Well, something similar happens when you're like this, because it's something exactly like that. And if you don't know how to express what you are thinking, then something happens that seems very strange to you. It is something like wondering if you really are the one who is writing, as if, and suddenly, as if by magic, you remember a dream. I don't know when I had it. And as soon as it arrives, it just goes away and you forget it. And you are even more sleepy now, and ouch. Your back itches, you scratch with fury because it bothers you that you can't scratch comfortably. Jeez. And you wonder, why do you put so much chlorine in the pool? It makes my skin so very dry. And dryness is not the worst, but what dry skin gives off, itching. So you keep on thinking about the swimming pool and the chlorine, which in addition to the itching, leaves a characteristic smell of the so-called substance whose chemical symbol is Cl. And then you remember your chemistry class and something else as a result, that it is nauseating, and you prefer to leave it in peace. Peace. Damn. What if there was peace? What if there were no people starving in the world? What if there was justice? What if people really appreciated other people for who they are and not for what they look like or their image? What if I fell asleep? What if you knew what would become of me? I'm looking for the next page. Ouch. On the morning of July 16, 1990, 2 or 3 policemen left this agency for Calle Mimosas 658 in the Pasteros neighborhood. An emergency call, a community in suspense. Tomás Rojas Madrid, the journalist who covered the case, might have opened this very door on his way to work. The forensic reports of the photographs and the witness statements arrived here first. Here, at some point, preliminary inquiry 40913-990-207 passed from hand to hand. Here, enough documents were gathered for a judge to issue the arrest warrant against Ángel González Ramos, who ran away and was never caught, who remains at large. Maybe I was here 29 years ago. One of Mrs. Irazábal's assistants walks by and, taking pity on us, tells us to join her inside at her desk. The lawyer, her boss, does not have the dossier we are looking for. She explains with infinite patience. The lawyer, her boss, is the head of the cold case unit. If they sent you here, it is because someone believes that there is a chance that that file from that long ago could have been kept here. A chance, I hear. Look at this, she continues, pointing at her computer screen, didactic and desperate at the same time. She enters a password and then the number of the case file. The system no longer recognizes it. See? We see. When I arrived here, she explains, about 11 years ago, they changed the entire operational system. And I'm sure it had been changed before then, too. But some files have to be preserved, don't they? I ask, believing that all documents will eventually find a place in the dead archives of the state. Some go to the concentration archive, she agrees, nodding intently, but even there is a time limit. They cannot stay there forever. She looks into my eyes. Do not believe for a minute that records live forever. I don't blink even as I stop breathing. I barely move as an army of ants creeps up inside my limbs, leaving a burning tail in their wake. My body begins to freeze over as it dawns on me that without this file, the institutional trace of my sister's life will be lost forever. With this file I'm after, her experience on Earth will be as good as nothing, her memory erased. In the future, I tell myself as I try to escape this moment, I will say that this is when I realize that I must write. I must replace this file I may never find. There is no other option. In the future, I will say, this is the split second in which I understood how writing defies the state. As everything stands still, suspended in this knot of rain and stalled cars and cracked pavement, I try to locate the sky. Anger is a lot like resignation, impotence, very much like fright. This is just the beginning, Sorai says, sitting on the edge of her seat and placing her right arm around the front seat back. She wants to see me face to face. She wants to confront me. We reached the land of the anthills. Now we have to dig, like underground predators. The driver takes increasingly narrow roads to escape the traffic, but she has less and less of a clue where she is or how she can avoid the traffic jams that appear on her new route. Desolate, motionless, her eyes in the rearview mirror tell us all we need to know about despair. Files may die, Sorai says, but they all leave a lingering trace. They have to. There is no other way around. You're a historian, you know better. She nods as she speaks, her cheekbones slightly flushed with fervor. Her conviction moves me, even if it is not true, even if files, just like people, are forcibly disappeared, with nothing to be found in their wake. Her conviction shakes me to the core, and I suddenly know what is next. I know I have to hire a lawyer to help me track down the dossier, and while the lawyer carries out the process, guiding my requests for documents and records through the intricate legal system, fielding their explanations for why these records are missing, I have to reveal the archive. While gazing out of the car windows, trying to locate the sky above Mexico City, it dawns on me that I have to produce the documents, the reports, the testimonies, the interviews, the evidence that the state could not, replacing the institutional archive with our archive, our own repository of touch and breath, voice, proximity, affect. I have to bring into being not only memory, but the bearers of memory itself. I glance at Sorai, suddenly ready for what's to come. If that dossier slips away, I say aloud for the first time, there will be no official trace of Liliana's life on Earth. If that dossier disappears, the possibility of locating and arresting the murderer, bringing him to justice, will also disappear forever. There must be a trial. There must be a sentence. She looks at me, unflinching. There must be justice. Femicide was not officially recognized in Mexico until June 14, 2012, when the Federal Penal Code incorporated it as a crime. Article 325, the crime of femicide is committed by someone who deprives a woman of her life because of her gender. Before that date, femicides were called crimes of passion. The victims were loose women, wayward girls, women without fear of God. They were called, why does she have to dress like this? And they were called, women have to respect themselves first. She must have done something to end up in this mess. It was her parents' fault. She made a poor decision. They were called, she deserved it. The lack of language is overwhelming. The lack of language handcuffs us, suffocates us, strangles us, shoots us, skins us, cuts us off, condemns us. When the feminist group Las Tesis performed A Rapist in Your Path on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women in 2019, and if you haven't seen this one, you can actually Google it, and you can have access to this very dramatic, powerful performance. In the center of Santiago, Chile, the piece resonated with so many around the world. And it was not my fault, or where I was, or how I dressed. Such pure, devastating words. It was a language already in use, a language the various groups of activists and various groups of survivors had put to work in courts and in squares, in bustling marches and around dining room tables. But it had rarely reverberated like it did this winter of 2019. So forceful, sharp as a knife, overwhelmingly true. Patriarchy is a judge who judges us for being born, and our punishment is the violence you already see. Do you know that the first time I called the district attorney's office to request an audience, they asked me what I was looking for? Soraya smokes with unwavering dedication. There is certain sensuality to the way she holds a cigarette between her fingers, and then in the way she brings it closer to her face and places it with such a delicacy between her lips. Taken aback, suddenly frozen, I did not know how to answer, you know? I stammered. I hesitated. I'm looking for her file, I said. The smoke in the air, the scent of something all between our bodies. Just that? The voice on the other side of the phone insisted, puzzled. It is femicide, impunity for my killer. It is disappearance. It is rape. Right then and there, I realized in the course of that phone call how little I was asking for, how little that was, a file. No, I said, speaking hurriedly now, as I was afraid he'd hung up on me. No, I'm looking for something else. The rapist is you. The figures formed by tobacco smoke rise and, little by little, dissolve into the air. I want to find the murderer. I want him to pay for his crime. I fell silent again. I swallowed hard. I seek justice. I finally said it. And I repeated it again, echoing so many other voices. I repeated once more firmly this time, with absolute clarity. The oppressing state is a male rapist. I seek justice, and it wasn't her fault, or where she was, or how she dressed. I seek justice for my sister. The rapist is you. Sometimes it takes 29 years to say it out loud. To say it out loud in a phone call with a lawyer at the General Attorney's Office. I seek justice. Sometimes it takes an eternity to return to Azcapotzalco and sit under the sheltering foliage of a tree as you listen, trembling with fear, full of disbelief, to the improbable song of some birds. We are in the afterward, which is long. A day after visiting the Mexico City Attorney General's office to try to get copies of preliminary investigation 40913-990-07, I go to the cemetery with my parents. It is October 4th. By now, Liliana has spent many more years underground, her bones cloaked by the fertile soil of a volcano than on the surface of the earth. It could have been her 51st birthday. It is her 51st birthday. Libra with an ascendant in Capricorn, a rooster in the Chinese zodiac. Here are the three of us, still invited to the feast of her life and her memory. We bring a hoe with us to weed out her grave and a couple of buckets to carry water. The tombstone is small and rectangular in shape, her name and the dates of her birth and death engraved in golden letters. No epigraph, no decorations. We have not forgotten to bring flowers, buying them as we have for 29 years from the same vendor. Out there, beyond the boundaries of the cemetery, we might pass for normal people. On the other side of the rusted iron gate, we walk and eat, greet friends, celebrate triumphs, offer condolences, attend classes or parties. Lives unfolded out there, apparently unscathed. Careers, books, trips, birthdays, children. But in here, softly brushed by this wind that first grips the peaks of the volcano and later touches meditatively the interior of our lungs with its cold wings, here we are pure sorrow. It is a lie that time passes. Time is stuck. There is an inert body here, stuck between the hinges and bolts of time, suspending its rhythm and sequence. We have not grown. We will never grow. Our wrinkles are artificial, contrived indications of the lives that could have lived, but have gone astray. The cavities, the fragile bones, the gray hair, the numb joints, mere impersonations that hide the repetition, the redundancy, the refrain. We're locked in a bubble of guilt and shame, asking ourselves over and over again, what did we not see? This is the echo. Sunlight is always spectacular in the fall. Why couldn't we protect her? The whisper of the wind through the oyamels, the clarity of pines. My father does not relinquish the hoe, and even though he's 84 years old, he removes the weeds all by himself, bending down to pluck the most stubborn grass or to undo the clods with its own rough hands when nothing else succeeds. He is soon out of breath. He sweats copiously. And while he toils over her grave, shedding some discreet tears in silence, I wonder how many times a day he remembers Liliana, how many times he recalls the amount of money that officer from the Attorney General's office demanded from him some 30 years ago to continue the investigation of Liliana's femicide, the required bribe. How many times a day does he blame himself for not having enough funds back then? How often the profane words, the crude words, the open-jawed beast of words with which the police commanders and agents refer to Liliana's body, to Liliana's life, to Liliana's death, resonate in his ears. How many times a day does he murmur the word justice? You are never more defenseless than when you are rendered speechless. Who in that summer of 1990 could have said, with her head held high, with the strength conferred by the conviction of being right and truthful, it was not her fault, nor did it matter where she was or how she dressed. Who, in a world where the word femicide did not exist, the term intimate terrorism did not exist, could have said what I now say without the slightest doubt? The only difference between my sister and me is that I never came across a murderer. The only difference between you and her. Living in grief is this, never being alone. Invisible but evident in many ways, the presence of the dead accompanies us in the tiny interstices of the days. Over the shoulder, inside the folds of our voice, within the echo of each step. Above the windows, on the edge of the horizon, among the shadows of the trees. They are always here, and here with us, with and inside us, shouting us with a warmth, protecting us from the open. This is our waking there are always other eyes seeing what I see, and imagining that other angle, imagining what these senses that are not my senses could make out through my own senses is, all things considered, the best definition of love I know. Grief is the end of loneliness. And this is it.
Anybody like to ask questions about?
Hi. Okay, well, yeah, go for it.
Go ahead.
Okay, good.
And can you tell me your name first?
Okay, my name is Suzanne.
Okay, Janet.
Yeah, hi, really nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you too.
Here's the reason why I'm doing the presentation. I'm very excited. I guess that my biggest question, and talking about all of this book so much, is the idea of, I mean, I know you work with the idea of misappropriation, with writing, but something that I feel that has been theorized about grief, or like el duelo, is, or something that lies maybe as that theorizing in a theory that works very well, is the idea of not appropriating the existence and the life of the or dead ones, right? So I think that's something that you do very well with your book. You're talking about Liliana, you're trying to keep a conversation about Liliana, you touch on her diaries, you talk to people, but I don't think in any moment you try to appropriate her existence nor her life. You respect her, like, that's Liliana, that's my sister. So yeah, like, how was that for you, like, the idea of grief, or like writing about grief? How do we get to this point when we treat and respect the otherness of or dead ones, or like the loved ones that are gone? How do we talk about that without falling into the appropriation side?
No, that's such an important question. Thank you. And something that I really thought about, and I was very concerned with as I was writing not only this book, but in general all the books that I've written. I said earlier in the class that I deeply believe that when I'm writing, when we are writing, we're always writing about someone else. We are always living with someone else's materials. And even though as members of a society we all tell stories, being a writer entails to think through very carefully in ethical and political terms about that transition. How am I going to bring all these materials that belong to other experiences on Earth here to these pages or to this screen? And writing specifically about violence tends to be a slippery terrain. There are so many dangers here to navigate. When I started to write the book, I didn't want to legitimize Liliana. I didn't want to erase her voice. The femicider had already choked life out of her, and I didn't want to continue with doing that. I didn't want to harm her. Fortunately, I didn't want to banalize her existence. I didn't want to editorialize her. I didn't want to overinterpret her. I didn't want to presume or assume. So there were all these concerns through the process of writing. And in addition to that, I always felt very close to me the presence of my sister, right here over my shoulder, kind of providing her own comments on my writing. Like I always felt her saying like, no, don't write that, that's too rosy. It's like, no, too sentimental, I don't like that, So I was having all these multiple conversations. And the point for me from the very beginning was how to bring Liliana back entirely, how to share with others the relevance of her life, and the fact that the loss that losing her represented for us, her family, but the loss that I think we all incurred into when we lose are taken, uprooted from our nest in our communities. So I wanted to bridge that with the very personal sense of loss, but also I wanted to reach the how others have felt and have been affected by a crime that is still very much a problem for us, right? So in this case, I had access to Liliana's own archive. Liliana was very careful in maintaining these documents. And so I was able to articulate her voice I saw myself as creating a context, a space in which her voice could resonate. So I wanted to rebuild these connections that had maintained her in life. And I wanted readers to be able to feel that. When I first opened the boxes containing Liliana's documents, I had known all along where they were. I had never been strong enough to actually go there, open the boxes, and read these materials. But when I did, I was overwhelmed by the sense of her presence near me. And I had to think about the fact that the papers that I was touching at that point had remained intact, untouched for 30 years. The last person that had been there touching those papers was my sisters. My sister's hands had been there. And 30 years later, I was doing the same. So I was thinking, this is our connection right here, and it is a material connection. It was not some, new age gimmick. It was not magical realism, case of magical realism, or wishful thinking. It was a materiality to it, and so that sensation was so strong that it became the axis of the whole writing process. Unfortunately, we know the story so well. The passion and crime narrative is very well known. Unfortunately, readers knew the end, at the very beginning of the book. But what they might not have known and might have wanted to know was what that connection, what that material touch was all about, and how life reverberates right there, and the kind of questions that life brings to us here in the present. So I wanted all that, and I'm describing this process because I think that's how I found my way in this very dangerous, slippery terrain that is writing about violence. So I don't know that it is not for me to decide if this was a successful try, and that's up to you. But at least that's what I had in mind. Those were the concerns that moved me and that made me, that guided my decision-making process as I was writing the book. So thank you for your question.
Other questions?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Abby Martinez.
What's your name again?
Abby Martinez.
Abby Martinez, hi.
Hi. So I was curious how you decided in your book, I was curious how you decided to balance Liliana's story and then also the like everyone's story with femicide, and how you decided to even out how much you wanted her voice to be showcased. Because I know recently I went to Mexico with my family because they're from Jalisco, and I saw a bunch of graffiti and things talking about femicide and like standing up and not silencing everyone, and so a bunch of protests and things when I went back in December. So I was wondering, how you decided to balance it, talking about femicide as a whole, just everything that a lot of women experience in Latin America, Mexico in particular, and the borderlands, versus how much you wanted to showcase your sister's voice, and how did you deal with that?
Wonderful question too. That was an issue clearly. the story too. So I wanted to be very personal in that sense, and I wanted to investigate or to bring back as many perspectives of Liliana's life as I was able to. And that's the reason why, in addition to reading her documents, I did some field research and I did some interviews so that I could have and share a sense of the complexity of her experience. But then at the same time, this experience took place in a context, right? And the context is the data of this context is horrific. And I'm not only talking about the context back then in 1990, but the context right now. So we all know that 10 women are killed in Mexico, in countries like Mexico or Honduras, every single day for reasons of gender. So these are considered to be femicides. So this is an urgent conversation. This is not something that I could evade or wanted to evade in any case. And in fact, the reason why I've been able to tell this story in the way it's told now is because now we have that language that makes this storytelling, this alternative storytelling possible too. And so that the connection is organic in that sense. My question search from the present came up from the present. I was interrogating the past, but whatever answer I was getting, it came back here to the present, and it partook of a conversation that, at least in countries like Mexico or Italy for that matter, I just realized is incredibly urgent. It brings me to the United States. Very often when talking about femicide, I found that people think that this is a problem of, places far away, with people that are very strange in their ways, wild people, unruly somehow. And when the data from the United States is also very horrific. 3 women in the United States are killed every single day by their intimate partners. And those numbers grew radically during the pandemic. So this data tells us, and some experts have argued, that we're actually facing a silent epidemic, something that we need language to bring up, to talk about. I recently, I'm moving away from your question, but I really want to say this. I'm sorry. No, I wrote an article for a Spanish newspaper, El País, and the title of the article in Spanish was "¿De qué se ríe el feminicida?" What is it, femicider laughing at? And I said a word right now, femicider, that is not very common in English. It's a word that actually, you might think that I do not know, that my English is really, really bad because I'm using a word that is not in common use. My translator used the word femicider in his first draft, and the newspaper changed the title, the headline, to "What is a killer laughing at?" And we were discussing this. The killer is, I was not talking about a killer. It's not just any kind of killer. I was talking a very specific one, a femicide, a man who was killing women, 14 women. And then we developed a conversation about how, sadly, and because of the enormous tragedy that femicide is being for countries like Mexico and throughout Latin America, how these countries have developed a specific language to retell, to recount these stories, and how sadly in this country we still have a lot of work to do. So from coining and ushering this new language talking about femicider, there's another word that we don't have in English, the genocida, the genocider, for example. And so we need, and I want to insist on enunciating these words whenever I go. This is part of my, I guess, a little bit of my activism, language activism, in terms of enlarging, expanding this conversation about femicide. But well, going back to your question, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. The telling of the story posed questions that came from the present and that arise from the present and came back to the present. And that's how I see the connection. I conducted interviews with Liliana's friends. I obviously talked to my family as well. And all of them are leading productive lives now, here, there, in Mexico City. And for all of them, this story was fundamental in the way in which they tell the story of their lives. So that's another organic connection, how we move from the personal to the social, because they're one and the same. They're mixed, they're profoundly interrelated. The I is not devoid of a context. Is in fact crisscrossed by all these other experiences of others. So I'm very much interested in making that the center of not only of this story, pretty much of everything that I write. Thank you for your question. That was long.
Do I have another question? Maybe the last question?
Yep.
Well, it was great to hear you. My name is Mayra Ortiz Ocaña. One of the things I like is you talking about like your interaction with the authorities. So I wanted to ask you, why are they relevant? I mean, like, you know what happened, so what did it mean to you to approach the authorities, knowing that it was like Costa Rica, to engage with them, because like the impunity is so great, so you know that you had like you will have a hard time like dealing with them. So why did you keep on going with them, even knowing that it's going to be so hard for you?
Yeah. No, that's another very good question too. You know that after I finished this book, and well, I've been talking and offering readings with the book and giving interviews and everything. And even though I'm doing that, the Mexican authorities have done next to nothing in regards to Liliana's case. And then I'm forced to think about the many families who have lost women, about whom there is not a single book or an article or some text. So this is happening with a case for which you have a whole book. It is just horrendous to think what happens to what has been happening for a long time with all these many families. And I needed to go back there because there are two things. On the one hand, I think it's very important to keep pressing for justice. I think there is a responsibility of the Mexican state and the state in general to provide and to protect the well-being of their citizens. And I think it's very important to keep on saying that these crimes continue to happen because there is impunity. Men, violent, aggressive men know that they can kill women and they can get away with it. They know that they have about 95% possibilities that nothing will happen to them at all. So impunity is an issue that allows femicide to grow. And well, going to the General Attorney's Office allows me to press also on that issue. And on the other hand, I feel also responsible and in solidarity with the many families that continue to do so. The many families and mothers who go back to these offices again and again against all hope and against all odds. And I wanted to be part of them. I wanted to share that experience as well. I've talked to Shirley Rivera She is the attorney in charge of the General Attorney's Office section in charge of femicides. And she's a wonderful woman, very strong too. I was talking to her about my frustration, and well, there's a long story that we don't have time for right now. But something that she said that was really important to me. I have been thinking all along about justice as a punitive act, and she called my attention to another definition of justice, restorative justice. Justice, an idea of justice in which truth and the reparation of damage is central, is key. And talking to her, I realized that perhaps writing this book and reading this book made all of us partake of this other definition of justice. So I'm becoming increasingly convinced that when we miss someone, when all together we manage to meet someone, something important happens in the world. Some small revolutionary energy gets unleashed. So these people are not numbers, they're not just names, they are lives. And the lives that we are missing, that we are lacking, right? And so when writing reminds us of that and puts us in that position, all of us missing this person that we didn't know, but that we know now. I think that's a potency of writing that I'm very grateful for. So it's one of the reasons why I go back to writing again and again.